I am announcing today my candidacy for the United States Senate on the Democratic Farmer-Labor ticket. I have been with the Republican Party for a long time. I've tried to salvage the situation with the Republican Party for a long time. And I will discuss with you briefly my concerns about the current state of the Republican Party in Minnesota and around the United States. We've had for decades a departure from fundamental values of the Republican Party and of America, a departure from Abraham Lincoln's commitment to racial justice, a departure from Teddy Roosevelt and Richard Nixon's willingness to protect the environment, a departure from President Eisenhower's cautionary warning to us when he left office to make sure that we do not allow the military-industrial complex to eat up the federal budget and drive us toward war. We have had a departure from the balanced budgets of President Eisenhower and the strict budgetary policies of many Republicans, including former Governor Arne Carlson. We now have spendthrifts running the Republican Party. We have a departure from a commitment to the right of women to make their own decisions about their reproductive health. We have had a departure from the commitment of former Republican presidents, including Teddy Roosevelt, and nominees for the Republican nomination for the presidency, including Barry Goldwater and John McCain, their commitment to campaign finance reform and to getting corporate money out of politics. These are only a few of the shortcomings of today's Republican Party that we had before Donald Trump came on the scene. What have we heard from Donald Trump? Donald Trump, during the campaign, demonstrated that he was a threat to our Constitution. We can start with the First Amendment of the Constitution, with his attacks on the freedom of the press, his attacks on the lying press, as he calls it, the fake news media. We have not heard such rhetoric in a presidential campaign since the 1932 election. And that's not the 1932 election between Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover. It was the 1932 election in Germany. And we're not going to go that route in the United States of America. We have not heard attacks on immigrants in our history, recent history, from a president, similar to what we have seen from Donald Trump, and attacks on people because of their religion. The notion that someone should not be allowed to enter our country because of their faith is fundamentally un-American and contrary to the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. And now we have a trade war that President Trump is seeking to launch that will destroy agriculture in the United States and in Minnesota. And we have seen very little by way of resistance to that trade war from Republicans and some Democrats. We need to stand firm against what President Trump is threatening to do to our country. And the only alternative this fall is going to be to vote for Democrats. The Republican Party has demonstrated that it's not willing to participate in our democratic system. Republicans insist if you're going to run for national office, you must be loyal to President Donald Trump. 2 Republican senators have been pressured out, sitting senators, because they would not support Donald Trump. This is wrong. This is not the America I want to live in. This is not the America I want my children to live in. And so I am going to seek the nomination of the Democratic Farmer-Labor Party for this seat. And I am going to fight alongside Minnesotans and Americans to do what is right to save our democracy from Donald Trump and his collaborators inside the United States and abroad, including every single member of Congress who refuses to investigate this administration for what they have done. Just last week, we had the United States Congress, the House Intelligence Committee, release a report basically saying there was no collaboration. What did we learn the same week from the New York Times? That the woman who was in the Trump Tower meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner was a Russian spy. Basically that, very close to the Kremlin. She said she was a lawyer. She was a lawyer like Michael Cohen's a lawyer. We'll talk about that later. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the influence of money in politics. This is a serious problem in both political parties, and we need to confront it. This is not a Donald Trump problem. This is a problem long before Donald Trump came along. Teddy Roosevelt recognized it. So did Barry Goldwater. So did John McCain. Many Democrats have recognized this problem, but we need to do something about it. The influence of PACs, and super PACs, big money donors, dark money organizations. My campaign will take no money from PACs. I do not want support from super PACs. I don't want any of these super PACs in this state. These decisions about who should be our United States Senator should be made by Minnesotans alone and not by the big money organizations. We've had enough of that. And we have had influence of corporate money on a national level, whether it's the banking industry that has sought to deregulate, to roll back the Dodd-Frank regulations so they can give us another 2008, as if the first time around wasn't enough fun. And now I'll talk for a minute about what we've got going on in this state. We've got large multinational corporations that own mining interests. They want to set up mines to mine copper, nickel, other metals in this state. I have some diagrams here about what's going on. Now, I'm not an environmental expert, but a lot of environmental experts have made it very clear that these mines, whether it's the Polymet mine or the Twin Metals mine, are a threat to our natural surroundings, the boundary waters in the case of the Twin Metals mine, and the watershed going into the Duluth and Lake Superior in the case of the Polymet mine. Serious environmental concerns. What I've looked at is the background of the people who are running these operations, including the billionaire from Chile who wants to open up the Twin Metals mine. Right after the election, he bought a house in Washington, D.C. Why did he buy that mansion? Because he knew Jared and Ivanka wanted it. He's Jared and Ivanka's landlord. He's also giving money to the Brookings Institution. Walked up to me when I gave a speech there. Knew I was from Minnesota. He wants his mine open. Well, my answer is no to that one. Controls the Bank of Chile. They were caught in a scandal giving money to the president of Chile after an election in 2013. We are not going to allow foreign billionaires to come into this state and mine our natural resources, destroy our environment on a hit and run and get out. And the same with the Polymet mine. That's owned, controlled by a company called Glencore. They don't want you talking about Glencore. Why? Because Glencore is a multinational entity based in Switzerland, billionaires in London and elsewhere controlling it. The new chairman, Tony Hayward, who was he? Oh, he's the man at British Petroleum who was responsible for the Deepwater Horizon disaster. And they brought him on, Mr. Environmental. He's going to keep it clean in Minnesota. Right. I'd say no to that one, too. Too much influence, and I've diagrammed some of that in these charts that are on both sides of me. We're going to stand up against foreign and domestic interests that want to come into the Minnesota and destroy our environment. We're not going to let big money determine our future and our children's future and destroy the boundary waters, destroy our waterways. We're going to stand firm against this. And that is one theme I'm going to emphasize in this campaign. I'd like to take questions. I want to thank my wife, Karen, the painter. Karen's a professor at the University of Minnesota Music History. We're at the end of the semester. It's a very busy time, and she's taken time out of her schedule to come and join me. I want to thank her and my campaign staff and friends and family. Thank you all for being here, but I want to take some questions.
Mr. Painter, as you know, National Democrats had put a little pressure on the governor to appoint somebody who would go on and run in the election. They hope Democrats would coalesce behind that person. It's Senator Smith. Do you worry that by getting in, you might divide the party and end up giving a victory to a Trump-supporting Republican?
No. That would have been a concern with an independent run, a very legitimate concern with an independent run, of splitting the vote in November. A primary in August is not going to harm the Democratic Party. It's going to make the Democratic Farmer-Labor Party a lot stronger when we can have debates about the important issues, such as what's going on when mining interests want to come into this state and destroy the environment, such as how we're going to regulate the banks and prevent another 2008 financial crisis. And I want to have a debate. I insist on having a debate with Senator Smith. That is critically important, that we have debates. And we can have the debates, post the debates online for Minnesotans to see. And guess what? That doesn't cost that much money. We don't need to waste money on a bunch of ads, a bunch of foolish attack ads that are divisive. That is how politics divides. It's the paid-for ads with all the big money, negative campaigning. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the issues. So I want to have a debate with Senator Smith, series of debates, talk about the environment, talk about the economy, talk about what we're going to do to stand up to President Trump. And that's not going to be divisive at all. We're going to go into this unified in November. And we're going to see many, many people voting for Democrats in November. Not just Democrats, but independents and Republicans, because we all want to live in a democracy. And that's not the message we're getting from the White House. That's not the message we're getting from the leadership of the Republican Party.
Professor, can you tell us exactly, precisely why you would not run in your own party, the Republican Party? You've given us the reasons why you want to defeat the actions of President Trump. But why not run as a Republican, because there may be enough people who won't do that?
Well, the problem in the Republican Party is they have made it very clear that nobody is welcome to be a candidate for a national office who does not support Donald Trump. They have some governors, such as Governor Charlie Baker of Massachusetts, and there's some others at the state level who do not support Donald Trump. But for the national office, any national office, they will not tolerate that. Two sitting United States senators pressured out, Senator Corker and Senator Flake. They're pressured out even though they're sitting United States senators, because they will not stand up to authoritarianism. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to give credence to the Republican Party, credibility to the Republican Party, when they want to continue to do business that way. And I happen to know if I entered into a Republican primary against anyone, whether it's for the U.S. House, for the U.S. Senate, against anyone who is a supporter of President Trump, the White House would make sure that millions of dollars is spent to take me out, to humiliate me. Why? Because I'm determined to get rid of Donald Trump, and they know it.
I'll follow up if I could. I've heard you say many times you've been a proud Republican. Are you still a Republican?
I'm out of the Republican Party. I'm fed up. We got to walk. We're going to see a lot of Minnesotans and people around the country who were Republicans for years are going to be voting Democratic in November. And one thing I'm going to do in this campaign is reach out to a lot of people who have not been identifying with the Democratic Party. We have the Democratic Farmer Labor Party here in Minnesota, but many farmers feel disconnected. Well, now that we see what Donald Trump is willing to do to agriculture, to destroy agriculture with a trade war with China, a lot of farmers are going to be willing to listen to what the Democratic Farmer Labor Party has to say. So we're going to see many people voting Democratic across the country who never did before, because we are fed up.
Senator Smith, why is she not the best person to fill out the remaining 2 years of the term? You're running against her, not the president. What specific criticism do you have of her?
She will be my opponent in the primary. I'm not going to spend my time in this race trashing on Senator Smith. That's not the way to do it. I'm going to discuss what I can bring to the table. I know that one of these mining ventures Senator Smith supports. I've asked her to change her mind on that. I would like to see her change her mind on that. That's the PolyMet one. I would like to see Senator Smith be a lot more willing to stand up to President Trump and to say that what he is doing is wrong and resist what he's doing, including the trade war. This trade war is not going to create very many jobs, if any, in northern Minnesota, in the Iron Range. That's the theory that we are being pitched, that somehow if we have a trade war and steel tariffs, we are going to create more jobs in the Iron Range. What's really going to happen is the Chinese retaliate, other countries retaliate. And then there's lower demand for United States manufactured goods. And that means lower demand for steel, not to mention the rest of the things we produce in this state and in the country, and destruction of our agricultural sector. So there's a difference between myself and Senator Smith, I believe, on the tariffs. I want to have a debate about issues with Senator Smith. But I'm not interested in running attack ads on Senator Smith. And I think the answer to your question is I'm running against Donald Trump and every one of his collaborators in the Republican Party. And I'm going to be talking a lot about that, much more than I am about Senator Smith. And we'll talk about 3 congressmen right here from the metro area who need to either stand up to Donald Trump or get out of office.
The Johnson Iron Range is one of the reasons that some Democrats support
Well, it isn't going to be jobs versus the environment. That's a false dichotomy. A lot of these jobs are going to be temporary jobs. We're told they're going to, from the polymet mine, they apparently going to invest $1 billion in this venture, but the number we're hearing in terms of number of jobs is 300 to 350. How many jobs are we going to destroy in tourism and in other industries by polluting our waterways in Minnesota? We need to find a way to create jobs in northern Minnesota outside of the mining area. And we also need to focus on the detrimental effect of tariffs on the economy as a whole. That has been tried. It was tried by Herbert Hoover. That's the last time the Republican Party flirted with tariffs. What happened? Out of office, out of the White House for 20 years. Complete economic disaster between that and the refusal of the Republican Party in the 1920s to regulate the banking industry. And here we are again. We got Donald Trump bringing in a bunch of people from Wall Street who want to deregulate the banking industry, and we're going to solve the jobs problems with tariffs. Very short sight. It's not going to help anybody in northern Minnesota. It's not going to help the country.
Did you consider running as an independent instead of either a DFL or a Republican?
Yes, I did. I looked at that very hard. My concern is that running as an independent could throw this race. I can't be a spoiler, not this year. Our democracy is at stake. We can't have anybody in the United States House and Senate, anybody, who is supporting the autocratic policies and rhetoric of President Trump. And we are not going to have people representing this state in the House or Senate. It is unacceptable that people representing this state in the House and Senate who are unwilling to stand up to President Trump. I am not going to go into this race as an independent, throw the race to Karen Housley or anyone else who is behind Donald Trump.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? You're dipping into the congressional races here when you're not in the Senate. Tell us about why you're so concerned about that.
Because this isn't about me. It's about our country. This is about whether we're going to have a House and Senate that are going to stand up to this president. I was 12 years old during the Watergate crisis. I remember my father came home and said Archie Cox was fired. I said, well, who's Archie Cox? Well, he's investigating the president. Well, who fired him? The president. Even at 12 years old, I could figure out something's wrong. We've had repeated threats to fire Bob Mueller. That's just one of the many things that has been going on in this administration. And what does Congress do? Absolutely nothing, other than make up stories about the FBI. That's Congressman Nunes from California. Yes, I know he's from California. Minnesotans can't do anything about that. But we can do something about my Congressman, Jason Lewis, who refuses to stand up to that, who continues to carry the water for Donald Trump. We can do something about our elected representatives in the House and the Senate. And this is about our democracy. So I'm not just going to be focusing on a primary race against Senator Smith. Obviously, that's what we're going to have a primary. We're going to have debates, and we're going to discuss the issues. But the big picture issue is our democracy. And we need everybody in Minnesota on board in November. Because if we don't value our democracy and we aren't willing to defend it in the voting booth, we're not going to keep it.
What will you do if you don't get the endorsement? The state convention comes up in, just over a month.
Well, I want the endorsement of the voters in Minnesota. That's going to be in August.
So you're into the primary, not the endorsement?
I'm happy to talk to, I'm happy to go to the convention if they'd like me to come to the convention. I will talk to anybody in Minnesota who wants to talk to me about this, including at the convention. But, I don't buy into this idea you ought to abide by the endorsement and not have a primary. I don't buy that. I think the voters ought to decide. And it's going to help the Democratic Farmer Labor Party to have those decisions made by the voters, that people will feel confident that they had a voice in choosing the candidate. So I think primaries are a good thing.
Just to be real clear on the endorsement, sometimes candidates go to the convention maybe to speak at the convention, but they're not officially seeking the convention's endorsement. Will you ask for the endorsement just in case you might get it, or will you just go and maybe hopefully talk to the convention?
I would ask for the endorsement. I like the endorsement. I like the endorsement of every voter in Minnesota. I'm not taking any PAC money. I'm going to make that very clear. No PAC money from anybody. But I want endorsements of everybody in Minnesota, and I want everyone's vote. And if the Democratic Farmer Labor Party wants to endorse me, that's just wonderful.
The Republicans attacked Senator Smith over a background in Planned Parenthood. Have you got a stand on reproductive rights?
It's none of the government's business whether women have abortions. I mean, that's, this is a party of small government that wants to get into telling women whether to have abortions or not. And I know Ronald Reagan brought that in 1980, so it's been a while. But before that, the Republican Party did not take that position. After Roe versus Wade, the Republican Party did not take that position under Gerald Ford. And a lot of women have left the Republican Party for that very same reason. So, we're fed up with the whole religious right thing, the abuse of religion to win elections. And that includes the attacks on Planned Parenthood and the rest of it.
Talk about some other issues, guns. Where do you stand on gun legislation?
We need reasonable gun regulation. I've made my views clear on the NRA 6 years ago. I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying they're running a protection racket in the Republican Party. What the NRA does is they say, you endorse our agenda, and we'll give you money, and we'll give you cover. You cross us on anything, and we're going to take you out in the primary. That's what the NRA has been doing for a long time in the Republican Party. Now we see some Russian money in the NRA. So I have absolutely no respect for them. We need reasonable gun regulations. Somebody ought to know, law enforcement ought to know, if somebody is acquiring large numbers of high-powered weapons, like that man who shot into the crowd in Las Vegas. And I went on Fox News. Yes, I dared to go on Fox News and say that to Tucker Carlson. And I got a lot of grief from him about that. And all I said is the police ought to know if somebody is holding on to dozens of semi-automatic weapons. And the NRA is so extreme that they don't think the police ought to know. We ought to have background checks for the purchase of weapons. And yes, the age ought to be 21. The NRA has gone to court down in Florida saying it's unconstitutional to deny an 18-year-old a semi-automatic weapon, even though they can't have a beer. I mean, it's ridiculous where we've gone on guns.
Professor, the Republicans in Washington, of course, have already put out a statement that is describing you as a Trump-hating impeachment advocate. Can you clarify for us about impeachment and trial in the Senate? Where do you stand? Should he be impeached?
I don't hate Donald Trump. I don't hate anybody. I love America. And I do hate what he's doing to our country and what his backers in the Republican Party are doing to our country. I think President Trump has demonstrated through his conduct and his rhetoric that he is unfit for office. As I said, we are well past the point where the House and the Senate convened hearings in the Watergate scandal. Well past that point. But the House and Senate were willing to do that in 1973 and 74. Perhaps it had something to do with the fact that the Democrats controlled the House and Senate. Well, maybe it's time to have a change. So we have those hearings. This president has demonstrated that he is not fit for office. Obstruction of justice, the collusion with the Russians, the constant lying, the financial conflicts of interest, the receipt of money from foreign governments in violation of the Constitution. The list goes on and on. It's too bad we have to wait till January to have the hearings. But there are going to be hearings in the House and the Senate in January. And the reason I'm leaving the Republican Party is it's quite clear to me that you're going to have both of those houses controlled by Democrats in order to have hearings in both houses. Because the Republicans, they're too busy still looking through Hillary's email.
Did you favor the Affordable Care Act, and where do you stand on health care?
The Affordable Care Act is a good start. We need to have 100% of the people in this country insured, to have health insurance.
You favor single payer?
Single payer is the ideal plan if you had it to do all over again. It's going to be the most efficient because then you could have the single payer negotiating with the various providers. I mean, enormous amounts of money going out the door to the drug companies, the medical device companies. I mean, if I had a lot of money in medical device stocks, I'd be all for this system. But, if you are somebody who cares about the cost of health care, you would want to have your insurer negotiating with the providers of medical devices, of drugs, the healthcare providers, the hospitals. Single payer would be the most efficient. It would help small businesses because small businesses struggle paying for health care for their employees. It's sinking small business, our current system. So we'd be better off with single payer. But this is the problem. We don't have it to just do all over again. We need to get from here to there, and we are not going to want to have legislation passing through the House and Senate that guts everybody's health insurance or already has health insurance. Let's focus on the people who don't have health insurance, whether it's Medicare for all or another approach that brings everybody in with health insurance. Make sure everybody has it first and foremost. Second, let's get to the most efficient system. So, yes, we can make a lot of arguments in favor of single payer, but we also do not get the opportunity to start from scratch. This is not a theoretical exercise. We need to make sure that every single American is insured. I'm going to put my country first. This isn't about party. And, we could talk about President Bush and decisions I would agree with or disagree with. I've made my views known on a broad range of issues. I started publishing articles in 1994. So I've got a long paper trail. So people want to assume that I just agreed with President Bush because I was the ethics lawyer in the White House trying to keep people out of trouble. Usually worked. But people want to assume that I agree with everything that President Bush did are assuming wrong. Take a look at what I've said. And I have a track record there, a public record. I'm going to focus on the issues. Our concern now is Donald Trump, not President Bush, not President George H.W. Bush, not President Reagan or Herbert Hoover, although I see some Herbert Hoover-type economic policies with President Trump. Our concern is President Trump. And I'm not seeking to endear myself to anybody because of their party affiliation. I'm seeking to do the right thing. So I'm going to campaign on the issues. And once again, I want to have a debate with Senator Smith and talk about the issues. We're going to find a lot of issues we agree on, some we don't. And a difference with respect to our approach and our priorities and our style and how we're going to deal with President Trump.
Are you running as a Democrat because that party most closely matches your values, or because it's the most convenient path for you to resist President Trump?
I'm raised a Democrat in the Democratic Farmer Labor Party because the Democratic Farmer Labor Party is willing to stand up for democracy. There are a broad range of opinions in the party. I'm more conservative than many people about protecting the environment. I mean, we could throw around terms like liberal or conservative or progressive. I thought conservative meant protecting the environment, protecting the planet from destruction, not only what's going on with these mines in Minnesota, but what's going on with climate change. So there are a lot of issues I agree with a lot of Democrats on, but there are going to be issues I disagree. And that's the whole point about having the debates.
Could you talk a little bit about some of the disagreements you had with the Bush administration, particularly in the 2+ years you served as chief authority?
In the financial conflicts of interest area, I spent a lot of my time on questions. Here's an example. Hank Paulson comes in. He's the Treasury wants to be the Treasury Secretary. He's got $600 million worth of Goldman Sachs stock, and I got to tell him he's got to sell it. I felt bad for him. $600 million. I'd never been in that situation. I deal with a lot of rich people coming to government. My disagreement with the Bush administration, as well as other administrations, is the number of people who come into the government who are super rich. I mean, it's fine to have rich people in the government, but to have cabinets that are predominantly the very well-to-do. That's been a serious problem in both Democratic and Republican administrations. Of course, the Trump administration is far worse. So that would be a disagreement I would have had with the Bush administration. Campaign finance. President Bush did sign the McCain-Feingold Act, but he indicated that it might not be constitutional. So asking the Supreme Court to throw that out, the McCain-Feingold Act. That was critically important legislation that would limit the impact of super PACs and dark money organizations in our political process. The Republican Party has refused to stand up for campaign finance reform, and there are a lot of people in the Bush administration who did not stand up for campaign finance reform. I'm not an expert on foreign affairs. I'm not an expert on whether there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but I know enough to know that there was faulty intelligence there, faulty intelligence that was wanted by some people in the White House to push an agenda. And that had very, very serious consequences for our country. That's not an issue I had a chance to advise President Bush on. I came to the White House in February 2005. We're already in there. But this is a serious problem when we don't have accurate intelligence and then make decisions based on faulty intelligence, and or the situation we have now where no matter how much intelligence information you want to put in front of the President of the United States, he wants to believe something else. So there are areas where I disagree with President Bush and with many in his administration. The failure to regulate the banks. Now, that was a problem under the Clinton administration, too. Let's not get too hyped up on partisanship here. There's a lot of deregulation under President Clinton. Repeal of Glass-Steagall. Letting the Wall Street banks go all over the country. More and more I'm trying to get in a place like Minnesota. And the financial system collapsed on President Bush's watch, 2008. Did we adequately regulate the financial services sector? Absolutely not. There are some Democrats who are willing to stand up for regulating the financial services sector. For example, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. There better be a lot more, because this cannot become the Democratic financier lawyer party. It's not the point.
Can you talk about, you mentioned style, contrasting yourself with Senator Smith. There's been an internal dialogue with Democrats for years about whether they can be, we can't be only against something or someone. We need to be for someone. It sounds like you're taking the priority of being against President Trump as your first message out there. And you see a distinction with that and Senator Smith. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm against what President Trump is doing and what his collaborators are doing. It's not just about President Trump. It's about what's been going on in the Republican Party for decades. You have this religious right that is willing to put our democracy at risk to accomplish their agenda. And that was a problem before President Trump. So there's a lot that I'm against and I'm worried about in this country. But I'm for America. I want to protect our natural resources. I believe we need to extend health care to every single American and health insurance to every single American. We need to regulate the banking sector. Now, I'm not against banks. I wrote a book in 2015 with my colleague at the University of Minnesota, Claire Hill, called Better Bankers, Better Banks. We're not against banks. We just think there ought to be some personal responsibility. We suggest, for example, that if someone gets paid $15 million a year by a bank and the bank goes bust on their watch, that maybe they should have to write a check for part of what's owed. Very basic. But I'm not against banks. I'm for a financial system that is well regulated, where people are held accountable. So there's a lot I'm for.
Do you have any idea how much money you might need to win a primary, and then also to win a, statewide general U.S. Senate election?
No, I don't care about the money. It's the message. I would love that people donate. Individuals. They got to be Americans, no Russians. Got to be American citizens, and no PACs. And I'm not going to accept, I don't want to have any involvement with super PACs and those dark money organizations. I don't think that's what it takes to win an election in Minnesota, because I think the Minnesota voters are smart enough not to listen to those attack ads. That's all that money buys, is nasty attack ads that tear the other person down. So with a positive message, I can do this with a lot less money. And what I want to ask Senator Smith to do is to have a debate, have a series of debates, and we can put them up on the internet for people to watch. That's not going to cost a load of money, and let the voters decide. Not spend all that money. I know she's got $400,000 from PAC, whatever it is. Don't spend that on a primary. I'm not going to go raise money from PACs at all. Let's focus on the message, not the money. I'm sick and tired of money in politics. And the idea that you have to either be super rich to win, or you have to know a lot of people are super rich, or you have to be a governor turned banking lobbyist who wants to be governor again. I know. Governor Paletti, whatever. He had an exploratory committee. I heard he was raising millions with the exploratory committee. My exploratory committee was just about exploring, not about putting a lot of money in my back pocket in order to run the race. Who? My wife Karen. Yes, Karen Painter. She's here. As I said, professor at the University of Minnesota Music School. Karen teaches music history. And she'd love to talk to you about that topic or anything else afterwards. I did bring the 3 kids. They're at school. No playing hooky for politics. If I were invited, I'd be thrilled to go. I will go where I'm invited.
So in other words, if there's not some formal invitation, you won't go?
Well, I'd like people that want me to come in the door. I mean, I don't want to stand outside with a sign there. I will speak to people anywhere in the state. I would love to speak to people at the Democratic Convention. I would love to speak with voters in this state who have never voted before, with people who have not voted Democratic before, independents. I will speak with anyone who talk with me. And I look forward to a debate with Senator Smith. And that's the first step. We've got to have a debate and focus on the issues.
Have you spoken with Ken Martin or anyone at the party?
I've not had a discussion with anyone in the party at this point.
Have you ever spoken with Senator Smith since she's become senator?
No.